All right, it's a little after 2, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program office hour session. The purpose of today's meeting is to go through the application process step by step to give us the opportunity to tell you what we're looking for on the application so that hopefully you'll have an easier time filling it out. To start with, I'll do a couple introductions. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Brittany Grother. I work for the Kansas Department of Agriculture as a grants coordinator. So the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program falls under one of the grants that I help administer. And then I also have a co-lead, Trace Mulligan, who's on this call, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Brittany. We're excited to have this call today and to share some information with you guys, and then also at the end, be able to answer some of your guys' questions that you might have as it pertains to the RFSI program and also the application. So my name is Trace Mulligan. I'm the Agribusiness Development Manager here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. So primarily work with small to mid-size farms, ranches, and agribusinesses with any growth or expansion plans. And with that, I'm the co-lead on the RFSI program. So a lot of the entities applying for this are those small, mid-sized farms, ranches, and agribusinesses. So it's a great fit and natural fit for Brittany and I to work together and to help as many of the businesses and entities out in the state of Kansas as possible. So we're really excited about this program and excited to start seeing some applications come in.
Thanks, Trace. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Kansas Rural Center. They've offered to provide some technical assistance on this program's application process. So Tom, I see that you're on. Do you want to just give a brief introduction as well?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm Tom Buller with the Kansas Rural Center, and we are happy to help support people applying for this program with idea development, thinking about how to manage grants, how to develop budgets, all of those kinds of things. So we're really excited to get as many Kansas producers applying for this as we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. So the first part of this meeting, we're going to run through the application process. If you have questions as we're running through the application, you can unmute or you can put your questions in the chat. If you do have specific questions about maybe something you are contemplating on your application specifically, we ask that you hold those until after we've ran through the application. That way we can turn the recording off. So we're recording this first part of the meeting for just general information, and then we'll stop the recording after we answer the general questions, and then we can answer some more specific questions during the time. We've held 2 hours for this time, so we really want you to throw all your questions out there. We can also talk offline if you're not comfortable asking them over the Zoom. So with that, I'm going to bring up the different page to get us started. So this is the landing page for our grants program, the Resilient Foods Infrastructure Program. On this page on our website, we have the program overview. We also have just some brief information about the different types of grants we're offering under the RFSI program. And then we have the section on how to apply. So if you haven't, we really encourage you to download and read this Kansas Request for Applications document. It's linked right there. That really has all the information that you need to have a baseline understanding of the program and what are eligible expenses under the grant. We also have our scoring rubrics included in there, so you can see how your application will be scored throughout the scoring process. And it also goes through how applications will be ranked when you would receive notice of funding, those type of things. So that should be your first place you go, is the Kansas Request for Applications document. Then we also ask that you review the application resources listed below. So we have the program scope and requirements document that's provided by the USDA. USDA AMS general terms and conditions will also help you figure out whether an expense is allowable or not. There's some specific terms and conditions for just the RFSI program that are right there. Then we have a quick start guide to getting a unique entity ID through SAM.gov. Then we have 2 different letter templates that may be required depending on which grant you're applying for. We have a verification of matching funds and the evidence of critical resources and infrastructure letters. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. through the application process. We also have a recording of our first webinar that we did that's linked here. And then we'll also post the recording of this webinar here. And we've also got our contact information for myself and Trace, as well as the Kansas Rural Center, if you're looking for that technical assistance that Tom has offered with his team. So next we are going to go to the landing page for the application process. So this is what it's going to look like on your end. When you click on it, here are the two different grants you could apply for. You can only apply for one with your business, so you need to choose what you want to apply for. There's a simplified equipment only grant, which are grants $10,000 to $100,000 in range with no matching requirement. And then the infrastructure grants, which are $100,000 to $3 million with the 50% match, unless you qualify for the reduced match of 25%. So I think there's just a little bit of a explanation on each one if you need a refresher there when you pop down the guidelines. Otherwise, you can go ahead and get started. You can save your progress as you go. So you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You'll have to submit or create a submittable account, which is simply a username and password. That's all that it requires. It's free. And then you can save your progress and come back to it anytime. So now at this point, I'm going to switch to the back end so we can see all the fields without us filling out all the information. All right, so we are going to go through the infrastructure grant because that's the longest application. And the equipment only grant application is a simplified version of this grant application. So this is the big one. It has the most requirements. So this is the one we're going to talk through. All right, so the first section is applicant information. So you're going to put your entity's names. That can be your business name, your nonprofit's name, your local government, just your official name that you would file your taxes under. Then you're going to select your entity type. And we have the definitions of the entities below here. I don't know if you can see my mouse as it's moving, but I'm pointing to it. So eligible entity type definitions, those are all the different groups. If you need to use the SBA's size standards tool, you can just click on it. It'll open up a new tab for you, and this is what it looks like. You can hit start, and it'll start asking you some questions to see if you qualify as a small business if you're a for-profit entity. There we go. So yep, you will just fill out as we go. We'll say that we're an agricultural producer, and then we'll go on to the next section. So the next section is asking for your unique entity identifier, which is your UEI number. This is something that's generated by sam.gov. So you can click this link and it'll take you right to the registration portal on sam.gov. Please make sure that you are using sam.gov. There are some scam websites out there that will try to charge you for a UEI number. UEI numbers are free. You should be using sam.gov, like Uncle Sam, sam.gov to do your registration. Please note that this can take up to several weeks to generate a number for your business. So if you're considering applying for these grants, either one of them, you need to start this process now, especially with the holidays coming up. Just go ahead and get this started so that you don't have to worry about it. You do have to put in a UEI number to be able to submit your application. So you really need to get your UEI number issued before you can submit your complete application at the end. So please, if you take anything away from today's meeting, please go get your UEI number started. All right, then you use your phone numbers. This can be your business phone number, an email address, and then your physical address. And then it's going to ask you if your mailing address is different from your physical address. If it is, you'll hit yes, and then it will pop out a field for you to fill in your mailing address. And that's for your business. So the next section is going to be your primary point of contact. So you might have filled out the business information from your CEO, or maybe you are an employee of your company, but you would like to be the point of contact for the grant project. You can put your name here. First name, last name, your title, your direct phone number, and your direct email address. And then you'll check this box if your mailing address is different than your business's mailing address that you would want to get information sent to, and it will pop down a pre-populated form again. Just bringing up the chat field so I can watch to see if anyone sends anything in while I'm talking. Okay. So section 1 and 2 should be pretty easy as long as you can get your UEI issued. The next section is project information. So you need to give your project a title. You can be creative, you cannot be creative. It's totally up to you, but it has to have a project title and it has a limit of 15 words. Next, you have your project start date and your project end date. Please read this text below. So we've given you some guidelines on the dates that you should use. Make sure your project is not starting before July 1st of 2024, and make sure your project is not ending any later than December 31st of 2026. Okay. Next is the executive summary. So we've put some prompts below these sections to kind of give you an idea of what you should be putting there, but it's just a brief summary of your project's purpose, what you expect to be able to deliver because of this project, and your expected outcomes. Talk about your general tasks and activities. Please note that there's a word limit of 250 words, so you're not writing an essay here. It's just 250 words, a brief summary of the goal of your project and what you expect to be doing and what you expect the outcomes to be. All right, the next one, it's section 4, which is the Distressed Communities Index. So there is a map linked right here. You just click the map. It's going to take you to this website and you'll just scroll down. It's thinking a little bit, but scroll down. It should already be linked. We linked it directly to the state of Kansas, so it should zoom in for you. So for this portion, you're going to type in the county scores for all the counties that your project is going to impact. So it can just be your one county that you're based in. If it's going to impact counties in your area, you could have 4 or 5. If it's going to impact the whole state, you unfortunately have to put all 105 county scores in. So keep that in mind. The colors are based off of the tiers of prosperity, basically. So dark blue is a very prosperous county. Light blue is comfortable. That greenish color is mid-tier. Orange is at risk and red is distressed. So for example, I'm going to click Pottawatomie County. And it's going to show me its distress score, which is 2.6. Pottawatomie County is a prosperous county. So you're going to take that 2.6 number. You're going to go to your form. It's thinking, takes it a second. You're going to scroll down to Pottawatomie County or whatever county you're in. And then you're going to type in the score. So 2.6. Okay. But do this for all the counties that will benefit from your project. So maybe employees are going to come from neighboring counties because you're creating new jobs with this equipment you're buying or something along those lines. You'll put all the counties that will benefit from your project. Keep in mind that the Distressed Community Index is part of the scoring rubric. So if you have more than one county, we're going to take an average of the county scores that you have listed. More points go towards scores that are higher. So the more distressed the community is, then the more points your application will receive. Does that make sense? So if you have just one county, we're going to take that score. If you have multiple counties, we're going to take an average of those county scores. And the higher the score, the more distressed the community is, the more points your application will receive. All right, section 5 is project purpose. So these are the types of projects as defined by the USDA. You can select all that apply. So just read through them and keep in mind what you're going to be doing with your project. Maybe you're building a new facility, and through that, you're going to be expanding your processing capacities. You can select as many as you want on here. depending on what your project is going to be. There's also an other field. So if you don't see something up here that fits your project and you want to type it, just hit other, and then you can describe your project type down here. But we would encourage you to use the project types that are already pre-typed, because those are the eligible project types under the grant. If you're doing something else that's not listed as a project type up here, it might not be eligible for funding. So if you have questions about that, just reach out to Trace or I, and we can help determine the eligibility of what you have in mind. Okay, and then the next section says provide the specific issue, problem, or need that your project will address. And this has a word limit of 500 words. So if you wanted to talk about maybe the health of your community and why you feel like this project would make a big impact on making the citizens in your county more healthy, you could talk about that, for example. You could talk about maybe local farmers in your area need a place to aggregate their products, and that's the need, and you want to talk about who would be supporting your project, things like that. You can put that here. Just keep in mind the limit is 500 words. I've seen people quote research in sections like this before, but you certainly don't have to. Just really think about your project and what is the need, what is the main need that it's going to address, and then explain that need to the review panel in this section, because we might not be familiar with your area of the state. They might not be as familiar with your section of the industry. For example, you might be a dairy business and a specialty crop farmer is reading your application as part of the review panel. So keep in mind, just provide a lot of context and explain what your specific issue or need that your project will address is here. Our review panel will be made up of people from all across the agriculture industry in the state. So just because you submit an application doesn't mean only people from your sector of the industry will read your application. So keep that in mind as you're filling out your application. Just the general consumer is reading your application. So keep that in mind. That's how you should write it. This general consumer would be reading it. So really explain what you're talking about. All right. Section 6 is project objectives. So this should be what your project hopes to achieve. You'll have specific objectives. You have to have at least one objective. You can have 5 if you would like. Just keep in mind that when you are reporting after the grant has been awarded and you have to report on a quarterly basis the progress you're made, you have to report on every objective that you list. So just keep that in mind. That will be part of a reporting burden. If you have 5 objectives, you'll have to report on all 5. So 1 to 3 would probably be the recommended amount of objectives. Section 7 is project beneficiaries. So these are people. Estimate the number of project beneficiaries. How many people do you think your project will benefit? This is just an estimate. You have no idea of knowing that for sure. As a very accurate number at this point. So it's just an estimate. At the end of your project, you'll have to give the actual number of project beneficiaries you think were impacted. So right now it's just an estimate. And then you need to select if your project will directly benefit any of the following groups. So we have underserved farmers and ranchers, new and beginning farmers and ranchers, military veteran producers, processors, or other middle of the supply businesses owned by socially disadvantaged individuals, or none of the above. So select all that apply. If none apply, just hit none of the above. Keep in mind that funding preference will go towards projects that are benefiting these groups of people per the USDA's directive. So just keep that in mind as you're filling it out. If your project can benefit a group of these people, that would be great. All of these definitions on who is considered an underserved farmer or a new and beginning farmer can be located in our request for applications document. At the very end of it, there's a whole section full of definitions. So if you have any questions about that, just go look at the definition section of the request for applications document. All right, section 8 is project support. So this can mean funding and also just general support. So if you have been funded or submitted this exact project for funding to another grant program, you need to hit yes here. And when you hit yes, you have to explain where else you've submitted the project for funding. So for example, maybe you've submitted to another USDA grant for this project. You need to explain that you have submitted it elsewhere here. And this is because we cannot duplicate funding at the federal level. So you can't be awarded 2 grants for the same purpose. If you've submitted something a little bit different to one grant program, you just need to explain the differences here, because we really want to avoid duplication of federal funding. The next section says, describe the stakeholders who support the need for this project and why. So please do not include support provided by you as the applicant and organizations directly involved in the project. So if, for example, if another organization is going to donate labor to your project, like time, they shouldn't be in this section because they are written into your grant application. These should be other groups who aren't directly involved in your project. For example, if you were a specialty crop producer and you wanted to get a letter of support from the Kansas Specialty Crop Growers Association, you could put their letter of support here and describe why they support the need for this project. It can also just be those in your community who support your project. You can say your economic development team supports it. Maybe you have like a community vitality group in your area, or maybe it's just a group of producers who are all together and say that this is a big need in your community. You can put that there. Maybe you have businesses who want to purchase your product, but you need to upgrade your equipment for packaging and labeling, something like that. You can put those there. Stakeholders can kind of be pretty open-ended. It doesn't have to be someone who has stake in your business. It can just be someone who is supporting your business and helping you grow. So that's 250 words on the text box section, and you can submit as many as 10 files or 10 letters of support to your application. All right. Section 9 is expected performance measures. So you do not have to fill out column C for all of these indicators. Only pick the ones that apply to your business. So for example, if you're going to modify an existing facility for this project, you can put 1 here. You're not going to, maybe for example, you're not going to build a new facility. You would just put NA over in the NA column D. So only fill out the ones that directly relate to your project. Because keep in mind, you'll have to report on all of these on a quarterly and annual basis on how the progress is being made. So only pick the ones that will actually produce results from your projects to be measured. So if if a key part of your project is training employees on new equipment and processes, you can put, I'm going to train 8 employees on this. But just keep in mind, only write in numbers for those that directly involve your project, write NA for any of the ones that don't. There's 2 outcome sections. There's outcome 2 and outcome 3. So look at both the tables and figure out what fits your project and estimate your expected numbers. All right. I'm going to pause before we get into the budget narrative. Trace, is there anything that I should have mentioned in the previous sections that I forgot? And does anyone have any questions?
I think you've done a pretty good job of explaining all of that. So if there's any questions though, now's a good time, kind of a mid-range, but we can always wait till the very end to do it if anybody has any questions that are top of mind that are directly related to those sections.
Yep, so really everything above section 10 is probably more of your written part of your application. And then we're going to get into your budget, which would be the number section. So keep that in mind. One thing I know I forgot at the beginning, scroll all the way back up. For the Small Business Administration size standards, if there's a question as you're using the tool for your tax, is that correct, Trace? It's asking for a,
Yep.
What's the code called? A NAICS code? Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe it's your NAIC code. or NAICS code. And so if your business, if you utilize an accountant of any type for like filing taxes, they should be able to help you with that to make sure you can see what like your entity's NAICS code is, and then you can just look in the SBA size standards webpage for that code specifically, and it'll tell you what kind of tax brackets. I know for like the dairy industry, for instance, I believe it's based off of like your income rather than the amount of employees you have. So you might check with that, your accountant or whoever you file your taxes with, or how you filed your taxes in the past, to see how that falls, because that'll help you determine if you are eligible to apply for the grant.
Perfect. Thank you, Trace. All right. We'll scroll back in. I received a chat question that asked, is there an impact of majority women-owned businesses? So that'll actually come into play in the budget section, which we'll talk about next, because women-owned small businesses qualify for the reduced match of 25%. Right. Well, I think we'll just roll right into the budget. If you have questions, throw them in the chat, or you can ask them unmuted at the end. Hold on. There was one question about nonprofits. Do they need to worry about the NAIS code? No, nonprofits are their own category. The NAIS code is only for for-profit businesses. So if you're a nonprofit organization, you don't have to worry about that. You just hit you're a nonprofit and you automatically qualify as an applicant. Okay, budget narrative. This is the meat. I would almost say the meat of the application. The narrative portions are also very important, but the budget, I think, is what takes people the most time to fill out. So we start off talking about matching funds. So for the infrastructure grants, all eligible entities must provide a 50% match or a 25% graduated match of the total proposed project costs. So to qualify for the 25% graduated match, which is also what we've been calling the reduced match, you have to be at least one of the following groups: beginning farmer or rancher, veteran farmer or rancher, limited resource farmer or rancher, socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, small disadvantaged business, women-owned small business, historically underserved farmers and ranchers. So again, all the definitions for these groups of people are located in our request for applications document. So if you aren't sure whether you qualify within one of those groups, just refer back to our request for applications document in the definitions section. It's also in the program scope and requirements document that's on our website as well. So you can find it in multiple different places, but this is a self-certification process. You do not have to upload any form of paperwork or certificate to prove that you meet the graduated match. All you have to do is, I certify that my entity qualifies for the graduated matched reduction of 25%. You just hit yes. Graduated just means reduced. It's another word that the USDA is using for reduced match. So that's what graduated means. You'll hear us use them interchangeably. It just means reduced. So if you click yes, you just have to check all of that apply of how you qualify for the match reduction. So you could say, I'm a beginning farmer and rancher and I'm a woman-owned small business. You can check them as many as apply. That will only pop up if you hit yes. Okay, for the match, you will have to explain that in all the budget tables, the funds requested, your match value, and your match type. For every form of match, you have to submit a match verification letter. So that can be a cash match or an in-kind match. So I'm going to bring up the letter template. Okay, perfect. Okay, this is what the match verification letter looks like. If you have a business letterhead, you can put it on the letterhead. If you don't have one, just delete that top sentence. It's totally fine. But you're going to put your basically your contact block here would be you're the application organization, you're the applicant. Well, maybe that's us. Oh, yes, it's going to be you. This is your contact information because whoever is providing the match to you is writing the letter. So for example, if the lumber company in your area is going to donate some of the lumber needed for the construction of your project, they would write this letter to you. You would put your contact, I'm ABC Business in Westmoreland, Kansas. I put that as the contact block here. Then they're going to write it to you. So, dear Jane Smith, we commit to providing the following matching funds to the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program Infrastructure Grant Project application by ABC Business. That's you. And then if they're donating lumber, that would be considered an in-kind contribution, which would be an item or activity. So you would put lumber, you'd put the fair market value, how it was determined, which could just be like if it's a business saying that, you could say that's the market average or something along those lines as of a certain date. Amount, and then if it's going to be spread out across the funding years. So if they're going to bring it to you July 1, you would put the value of it on July 1. And then they would sign it with their business. So I'm just saying I'm ZYX Lumber in Wamego, Kansas, and I'm the owner. So that's kind of how that letter can look like if it's a business that is donating something to your project. You can also have cash. So for example, it could be your bank writing a loan saying that they're going to provide you a short-term loan. So they would be writing this letter to you, ABC Business, Jane Smith, ABC Business, cash in the total amount of, say you got a loan for $100,000. They will provide that during the grant period. The funds will be used for, and you might help them out on this letter part of what you're going to be using those funds for. Then they'll break it out, and then they will sign it as WWW Bank, and then their title would be like loan officer or something. So that's an example of cash. People can also provide in contributions as salary and wages of their staff. So maybe, for example, you're partnering with another organization and they are going to provide their staff time to help with the installation of equipment. Maybe you're buying equipment from somebody and they're going to donate their technician's time to help install it, or maybe an electrician is going to donate their hours to rewire an outlet for you or something. You can put the employee name, their title, description of duties, their base rate, and then how that's going to be spread out across the years of your project. Those are just a couple examples of how a match verification letter could look. But that needs to be done for each individual type of match provided. Oops, maybe I don't want to, in case anyone has questions about that later, I'll leave that up, but it's for each cash or in-kind resource. So think of it as every business who's going to provide cash or in-kind to your project, each individual business would need to write a letter to you. So you can upload those all right here. And that can be a Word document, a PDF, a picture. We put a whole bunch of different file types there, so should be able to submit anything. All right, next is your overall budget summary. So this is really probably the last thing you're gonna fill out, but it's at the very top. Because when a reviewer looks at your application, this is what they want to know right off the bat, how much money you're asking for. But really, you should probably fill out all the other sections first and then bring those totals up to the overall budget summary table. So I think that's what I'm gonna propose we talk through that way. So first, personnel. So all the people who are gonna work on your project, if you want the grant to pay for their time or somebody is donating their time to the project, you would put them there. You need to list every person on their own row. Level of effort is maybe the number of hours they're going to contribute to your project or the percent of their time as a full-time employee. So maybe they're going to devote 10% of their time in a year to your project, you'd put 10% there. Or maybe they're only going to donate 80 or contribute 80 hours. You can write it in either format there. Funds requested is how much you would like the grant to pay for. Match value would be if someone's going to donate that. So you shouldn't have, well, I guess you could if you wanted to split it and say you want the grant to pay for half of those hours. So, for example, Jane Smith is going to charge 80 hours to the grant for this project. And we want to request 40 hours of her time to be paid for by the grant. So you'd put that dollar amount here. And then you want the grant, she's going to donate or the business is going to donate half of her time. So the other 40 hours, you'd put the exact same. So this is not going to be realistic because I can't think of numbers off the fly that are reasonable, but say 500 and 500. And say that was going to be in kind because the business that she works for is going to pay the match value, and then the grant is going to pay the funds requested. So that's how that works out. If you don't have a match value, you don't have to fill out column E, you would just put in A. So for example, Joe Smith is going to do 80 hours. And we're going to have the grant pay for all of his hours. Oops. It's really thinking. And we're not going to match any of that. We're not donating any of his time to the grant. So we just put NA. We're not matching it. We want to request $1,000 and we want it to be provided by the grant. So all of these budget tables are going to auto total for you down at the bottom. So that when you are filling out your budget summary up at the top, you can say funds requested, that was $1,500. I can come up here to personnel. I can type in $1,500. Then you're going to scroll down. The match value was $500. I'm going to scroll back up and I got to put in $500. So it should do all the math for you. And then that match was in kind. And if you have multiple sources in one budget table, say one is an in-kind match, one's a cash match, just put a comma and say that you did multiple kinds there. But for now, it was just in kind. Okay, next is the justification. So every budget table in the application has a justification section. So for each individual you have listed up here, you're going to say Jane Smith, personnel 1, because I'm using the format that's below, personnel 1. You can say Jane Smith, and then you're going to say what her job is on the project. So maybe Jane is in charge of all of the accounting and accounts payable. Well, I guess that's accounting for the grant project. You just put what she's responsible for. Personnel 2, Joe Smith. He's going to be in charge of constructing the new building that we're putting in. It does not have to be super lengthy. Just tell us what that person is going to be doing on your grant project. The next section is fringe. So fringe benefits are things like paying for health insurance, those type of fringe benefits an employee is offered through their employment if they're benefits eligible. It could be paying a portion of their retirement. It's just things that you as a business are already paying those people as fringe benefits. But for every personnel person you list on your personnel table, they need to have a line or a row on the fringe benefits table, even if you are not going to pay them fringe benefits. I forgot it's asking for their title up here too. So make sure to put their titles in here as well. Rate, this would be something that your business already has as their fringe benefit rate. Funds requested and match value, just like the table up above. Funds requested is what you want the grant to pay for. Match value is what you would be donating to the project as your match. So it's not paid for by the grant, but it needs to be paid for during the project. It's considered a match. There's a question, do Social Security costs count as fringe benefits? I think that's based off of your individual business, what you pay as fringe benefits to your employees. If that's something that's included in their salary or their hourly rates, then you can include it, but you can't just add it for the purpose of the grant. So if that's something you already pay your employees as a fringe benefit, then you can include it. But if it's not something you pay them, you can't just include it for this grant. All right, travel. If you have to do any types of trips for your grant project, you can put that in here. It can cover airfare, car rental, hotel, mileage is another example. So maybe you have to, maybe you're not gonna have something delivered and you have to go pick it up. You could put that here as a trip so that you can be reimbursed for your mileage. If you have to go to, a lot of this is for projects that you have to travel to a conference or something along those lines. But if you have a trip that you need to go and pick something up or need to meet with someone, something like that, you can put that in travel. So for each expense type, you need to have a different row. So even if the trip is the same, say you're going to Emporia, Kansas, maybe you live really far away from Emporia and you need an overnight stay, you would do your mileage on one and you would do your hotel on another line, even though it's the same trip. This would be by miles, this would be by nights. I don't know how many miles you're traveling, maybe 500 round trip, and nights would just be one. You put in your cost per unit. So say your hotel room is $98. If it's one person who's staying the night, it would be $98. Oops. Same thing, how much it costs per mile. You would want to look at the GSA calculator link, which is down here below, because you need to make sure that it is the government rate. You can't just pick the current gas costs. You have to use the GSA link down here. Tom put in there that they have a lot of federal grants and they usually include Social Security as part of their fringe calculation. Alternatively, you could include those numbers as part of your salary calculation. So thank you, Tom, for providing that insight. And then Robert asked, if you make the same trip every week, does that require a separate entry? So it's I'm trying to see, there's no like date on this table, which sometimes they ask for dates. I think you'll have to do, if you want the grant to cover it, I think you'll have to put put it on new columns every time. Otherwise, it's not gonna calculate at the bottom for you. It's just gonna calculate one rate for one trip. And if you wanted to be reimbursed for multiple trips, I think that will be multiple rows.
Robert,
Just based off-
one thing I was thinking on that, Brittany, is to make sure that if you're putting something in travel, that it's related to your project, and not not just a business travel for something that's not related to your project.
Yeah. And if you're wanting to, if you make that trip every week and you're already paying it through your business expenses, maybe that's something you're providing as a match and your business is going to pay for it. So that's something to think about. But yeah, I think you'll need to do a row for each trip that you want to be included in the purpose of the grant. So, okay, here's the dates. I knew it was somewhere. Under the travel justification section of the application, you need to just write out every trip. So let's say rows 2 and 3 are the same trip. So you could just say trip 1, approximate date of travel would be 1st of July through the 2nd of July. Oops. And then you would say what you're traveling for. Pick up supplies from vendor or something along those lines. So row 2 and 3 would be considered trip 1 because you're going to the same place on the same dates. So at least you don't have to write a million lines on the travel justification. You can group them together in the justification. You could say, you might want to just provide a little bit more detail than I did in this description so that it shows you're grouping those together. So travel to Emporia, Kansas. To pick up supplies for project. Oop, sorry, it is a little bit slower than I'm typing, so it takes a second. For project, we'll need to stay overnight. It's due to distance, something along those lines. That way we know it's grouped together. But for each trip, you would write a new one. And then you just check this box that says, I confirm that my organization's established travel policies will be adhered to. That's just your business. Make sure you're following your own business's procedures in terms of travel policies there. So just check it. You have to check it. So make sure that you're following your organization's travel policies. If you're a producer and it's just you make your own policies. So you check that box. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. It's mainly for like organizations like if the Kansas Department of Agriculture was applying for a grant, we have an established travel policy under the state of Kansas. So it's more strict. So we check that we follow it. But if you own your own business, you're following your organization's travel policies because you're making them. Okay, equipment. This is a bigger table. We've got 20 lines here. These are your bigger expenses, individual expenses. So the acquisition cost should be exceeding $5,000 per unit, but it doesn't have to. That was some clarification we got. If it's a piece of equipment, it probably needs to be specialized. It shouldn't be very general. If you want to put it in the equipment box. But for example, like a fan, like a box fan would not be considered equipment, but a piece of processing equipment that helps you grind flour would be considered a piece of equipment. So think of equipment as your bigger purchases for the operations of your business, and then supplies would be your smaller purchases. So if you had to buy 5-box fans. They would go under supplies rather than equipment. So equipments are, those big pieces of equipment that are specialized. That goes under equipment. The less specialized things that are lower in cost value would go under supplies. And again, you can be renting or purchasing the equipment. So put rental or purchase, that's just you typing the word rental or purchase. The acquisition date is when you're going to buy it. The funds requested is how much you want the grant to contribute. Match is how much you're contributing as a business. For each one of these, you do not have to have both D and E filled out. If you want the grant to pay for it entirely and you don't plan to provide any match for that, just leave match value blank and put NA in column F. For each line, each row of equipment, you need to put a equipment justification. You need to talk about what that piece of equipment does and why you need it for your project in the table. Same thing with supplies. For every row on the supplies table, you're going to have to write a justification on what it is and why you need it for your project. For supplies, you put the cost per unit and then the number you're acquiring when you are going to buy it. If you want the grant to pay for it or if you want match to pay for it. Construction, these are, you are going to put a description of what is being constructed, when it's going to start, and then the funds are questioned in match value. Again, construction, for each row on the table, you need to provide a justification that says what it is and why you need it for your project. You also have a contractual and consultant section. So if you're hiring on contract employees or something along those lines, maybe you're hiring a construction crew, or maybe you're hiring an electrician and a plumber and all those different contractual employees, you would put them here. So their name and then the organization. So if I'm going to buy, or if I'm going to hire a plumber, I would put the plumber's business name there, their hourly and flat rate, and then funds requested or match value. Again, you have to write out for every row what that person does and why you needed them to be hired on for your project. Their rates need to be reasonable. And there is a link here that you can check what the federal employee salary is in your area. It cannot be higher than this GS 15 step 10 federal employee. So if you think it's going to be higher than that, just click on that link and check for your area what the hourly rates are and make sure it doesn't go over that. And then again, you have to check this box that says you confirm that your organization followed the same policies and procedures for procurements from non-federal sources. Then there's an other section. So if there's any other expenses for your project that were not already mentioned in a different budget table, you can put them in other. And again, you have to put what it is and why you need it in the other justification. All of these will come up once you're done with them. You need to come back up to the top and type them into the big budget table up here. And then the last thing that can be factored into your budget is indirect costs. So we'll scroll down, back down to indirect costs. So indirect costs rate, if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, which is the NICRA, I've heard it said NICRA and NICRA before. If you have one of those, you have to follow that. And then you need to upload a copy of the current certificate here. If you do not have one, you can charge a de minimis rate of 10% of your modified total direct costs. So you can charge 10% of the direct cost you are charging to the grant as indirect cost rate to cover like administrative expenses and depreciation, just general things that aren't captured in other parts of your budget table. You can charge 10% of the total direct costs here. And you can either request that from the grant, or you can say my organization is going to provide that as the match. It's up to you. And then once you have that figured out, you'll have to go up and put that in the big budget table. Oop, passed it. Under indirect costs. So bring that up. And then once you're all done, the table should auto-calculate for you your total budget costs for your project, and you'll type that in right here. All right, that was not everything from the budget yet. Okay. Yes, that was the budget. The last section is evidence of critical infrastructure. So this letter is required if critical resources and or infrastructure are necessary for the completion of the proposed infrastructure grant projects. This could be land, structures, or other critical resources that must be in place in a working condition at the time of application submission. So we have a template letter for this on our website as well. Pull it up. All right. So if you have a letterhead, put it on your letterhead. If not, delete this top row. You are going to, again, put your contact block for your business up top, put the date, and then the letter will be addressed to the point of contact for your grant application. So dear Jane Doe, you basically just fill in the highlighted gray sections that says that you're committing the critical resource or infrastructure to this project, and then the dates of commitment, and then you're going to describe what that critical resource or infrastructure is. So for example, you're going to build a new processing facility on a piece of property. An evidence of critical resources letter would state that you already own the land that you're going to build this facility on, because the land is needed and is critical to the success of your project. If you don't have land, you can't build your new facility there. So this letter would show the review committee that you already have purchased the land, or you have a lease agreement for the land. So if you're leasing it from someone, which is pretty common, the person you're leasing it from could write this letter. If you've purchased the land, maybe your bank could write the letter saying you've purchased the land or something along those lines. Or maybe your accountant could write this letter that says that you own the land. Maybe you already have a building and you're going to renovate it and put in new equipment in there. Again, this letter of critical infrastructure would say that you already own or rent that building, and that you will have it in your possession the entire length of the grant. So that's what critical resources and infrastructure is. Anything that you need for the project to be successful that you already have, but is needed for the success of all the other components you're trying to use the grant for, you would put it on this letter of critical infrastructure. And you can upload those right here. So, for example, you have a letter from your accountant saying you own the piece of land, and you have, or that you, own the piece of land, and then you have another from a construction company that says the building will be finished at this time because you're only using this grant to put equipment inside that building, that type of thing. Okay. Those are all of the sections on the infrastructure grant template. Do you guys have any questions now before I move to the equipment only application? I'm sure I made your brain hurt because I made my own throat hurt because I was talking for so long. So it's a lot to sink in. And we'll also put the recording online so you can go back and listen to it if you would like. Okay. Everyone was too stunned to speak.
I have a
I'm gonna
question
go. Yeah,
regarding
go for it.
regarding section 4 on
Mhm.
the community index. I assume that a community that is distressed, but that's within a county that is prosperous, that doesn't really matter. There's no breakdown. It's either the whole county or nothing. Is that what
Right.
I'm?
Yep.
Okay.
We're just taking the county score. So
Yep.
even if your city has a different level of distress, this application only uses the county-wide score.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, Charlotte has a question in the chat. Would a nonprofit that distributes food from various farms be eligible for these grants? Those receiving the products pay a fee for their goods. Same question for a for-profit. So this grant is targeted towards middle of the food supply chain businesses. So as long as they're not using the grant funds for the production of those crops and the retail side of things, like they couldn't use it for their sales systems or their sale displays, but they could use it for like distribution, aggregation, like maybe they have an aggregation site where they are storing the products from various farmers. They could use it to purchase a cold storage. They could use it to purchase delivery vehicles, those type of things. And it works regardless of how that business is classified, whether that's a nonprofit or for-profit. Does that answer your question, Charlotte? So it really just has to focus in on those middle of the food supply chain activities, but that type of business model is eligible. Okay. All right. Well, while you guys think of more questions, I'm gonna back over to the equipment only application because there are just a few unique things about it that I want to talk about. Okay, for the simplified equipment only grants, the majority of this application is the same as the infrastructure grants. There's just a lot less information needed. So all this top part is the same. For section 5 project purpose, you're just going to select all that apply. Types of agricultural food products processed with the desired equipment, select all that apply. Scope of work. These are pretty self-explanatory sections, but it's some different narrative components to this one. I'm asking what the need the equipment will address is, what current business operations include these services in your area, what's the impact this equipment will have on local and regional producers, and then estimate the local and regional producers who will be impacted, the number. Check which types of groups will be impacted or will directly benefit. Project support's the same. There are less outcomes to choose from for equipment only. The budget narrative is only for equipment. That's the only thing you can buy with this grant, so that's the only budget table you have to fill out as equipment. This is the only other section that's unique to the equipment only, is the cost documentation. So cost documentation for each piece of equipment can be catalog pricing, bids, quotes, anything like that. But for each piece of equipment that you're requesting the grant pay for, you need to upload a separate file for. We can pay for delivery and installation if it's written into the quote. So because there's no other place on this application to put that, it needs to be included in the equipment cost. So we can pay for it as long as it's on the quote. If it's not on the quote, then the grant can't pay for it. You do not have to buy only new equipment. You can buy used equipment as long as it's in good condition and you can get some type of quote for it. So maybe you are buying it from another producer a couple counties over. As long as they can write up a quote for you, that's fine. You can buy used equipment. Trying to think what else is new that we learned about equipment. Yep, the equipment can be refurbished. You just have to get a quote for documentation purposes. on how much it's gonna be. We understand that prices are gonna go up. That's just the nature of it. So if you are getting quotes or bids, try to get them to be honored until July 1st, which is when the funding will be awarded. We're gonna try to let people know in late June of the awards if possible, but it's really at the discretion of the USDA when they let us know. So keep in mind that try to get those bids and quotes honored until July 1st, because that's the earliest you could be paying for those. Pieces of equipment need to be bought during the grant's period of performance. So that's starting July 1. So keep that in mind, is that you should not be buying the equipment before July 1. Because it needs to be paid for within the period of performance for the grant. If we can let you know a couple weeks before July 1, so you can start the ordering process, that's great. But keep in mind that you should not be paying for that equipment if you want the grant to pay for it before July 1st, because that's when the grant starts. If you want to order that equipment before July 1st, keep in mind that this is a competitive process. You're not guaranteed this funding. So if you order it hoping that the grant's going to pay for it and you don't get the grant, then that's unfortunately nothing we can do to help you there. So it's really just for the betterment of everyone involved. If you don't start that ordering process too early before you know that you've got the award, unless that's something that if you don't get the grant, you know your business is going to be able to pay for. Keep in mind that both of these grants are reimbursement grants, so you have to pay for it up front, and then you submit a receipt to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and we pay you back for it. So just wanted to make sure that's super clear for everyone, that you have to pay for the things up front, and then we will reimburse you for that expense. I see some questions coming in on the chat, so let me look. It looks like Trace answered Colin's question about commercial kitchen. So that's great. Does the cost have to match exactly the quote, or how does that work? So for example, you attach a quote for a piece of equipment, and then come July 1, it's more expensive than the quote you got approved for. The grant is only going to pay you what the quote says, or up to what the quote says. If for some off chance the equipment comes in less than the quote price on July 1, you're only going to get what you actually paid for it back. But we can only pay you what you actually paid for up to the amount of the grant. So if after July 1 it's more expensive by $150, we will reimburse you what the grant award is. We can't pay that extra $150. Robert asked, if more than one piece of equipment is in the grant, are there partial awards, or is it all or nothing? So applications are considered as a whole. We would not break them apart to give you to pay for one piece of equipment when you ask for 5. So keep that in mind. Your application is evaluated as a whole. It will not be broken apart in any way. So if we don't want to, if the grant can't pay for all 5 pieces of equipment you listed on there, you would not receive it. Could funds be used for wheelchair ramps to the commercial kitchen building? Colin, I don't think so, because even though that is a needed part of your facility, everything that the grant pays for has to be for middle of the food supply chain activities. And since wheelchair accessibility isn't part of the middle of the food supply chain, that's I don't think that's going to be an eligible expense for your grant project.
The only way I could maybe see that working is if you were like building a commercial kitchen from like completely scratch, and it was a part of like the building plan itself. But more than likely, that's probably going to be a little challenging to fit in there.
Yeah, if you're like moving into a facility and renovating it to be a commercial kitchen, and you wanted to put in a wheelchair ramp, then that wouldn't be an eligible expense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even though that's needed for your building, that's just not something this grant can pay for. There might be other grants out there to help make your facility wheelchair accessible, but unfortunately, this grant, that's just not an eligible expense. All right, well, I'm gonna stop the recording, I think, at this point. Well, me and Trace will be here for the next 45-ish minutes and can answer any questions you can think of, but this is, I'm gonna stop the recording for the general questions portion of things, and then we can get into more specific questions if anyone has them off the recording. So give me a second.